Welcome to the Sacred Emergence Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Wong, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. This is a place where you'll be guided to living your most aligned life so that your truest, most radiant self can emerge. We'll be jamming on topics ranging from spirituality, entrepreneurship, to wellness and lifestyle design, and everything in between that can support you to grow, evolve, and shine, all the while not taking ourselves too seriously. So if you're ready to step into your leadership, break through limiting beliefs, own all of who you are, and expand in abundance, grab yourself your faith cup of tea and let's dive in. Hello. Welcome to today's episode of the Sacred Emergence Podcast. It is Michelle Wong. Welcome. Today we are having a solo episode, so just you and me, and this is actually one episode that might be potentially spicy. It might be a little bit activating. I'm going to be talking about spiritual bypassing and a little bit about my experience with it, and almost just like having a conversation, although it's a one-way conversation. And a lot of it is from my own experience. So a reminder to take care of yourself. If this is a little bit too activating for you or you highly disagree with me, maybe skip it or listen to this in parts, not the whole way through. And also an invitation to be curious. Because this is a topic I am pretty passionate about, I might get my voice might get a little bit high, or I might swear. I definitely will likely swear. So headphones are recommended if you have kids around. And if I ever end up saying you as I'm talking, when you do this, you do that, I'll do my best not to, but I don't mean you, the listener. So I'll do my best to be mindful of that and just to, give a heads up, just to take it easy, deep breaths, and, go slow. So this actual topic came up for me to want to record from my own personal experience, and what actually brought it to the forefront of my mind is something that is, I guess, tangentially related. I saw a post on Facebook from friends, acquaintances around the topic around cultish. And there's a book, I believe, on called Cultish, which I haven't actually read it, but I'm curious. And I think because, I really feel like our society, our culture, it's going through shifts, right? There's a paradigm shift happening that I think is requiring more people to be intentional with their words, more intentional with looking at how they see things, maybe digging deeper at their beliefs. And it's is this actually really true? Do I actually believe this? And, is this for, does this serve the greater good, And when I saw the post around cultish, a word, a phrase that is so used in the spiritual world, that it popped into my mind. And it actually reminded me of times when I was going through hardships, when these words have been shared with me. And I remember spiritually bypassing myself because I was spiritually bypassed, and one of the examples is everything happens for a reason. And that's a big one. So I'll talk about a little bit about that one, just from my own experience, and also the nuances, the underlying dismissiveness around that word, phrase. And I actually shared my thoughts about it more. I don't know if it was a thought. It was more a post that was this is just not true. Everything does not happen for a reason. And I got a lot of pushback on it. And a lot of it is from the spiritual world. I would just say I might push some buttons here. I'll say it's from this new age superficial spiritual world, not the spiritual world, but this belief that I think is so easy to adopt. And I fall into that as well. I've invested in so many different training programs, personal development, personal growth programs, where I have been fed into like, what does it mean to take the higher road, be high vibe, focus on gratitude? And I don't think focusing on gratitude is a bad thing. I don't think forgiveness is a bad thing. I just think there's a timing to it. And if someone is feeling bad, the first thing to do is not to skip to gratitude, is not to focus on forgiveness. It's to tend to our emotions. Because something got, I'll say, I don't want to say the word trigger, but something got tickled or touched in our nervous system that, can relate to trauma. And I am not an expert on trauma. I'm not a therapist. And I'm also a human being, so I have feelings, I have emotions, and I know that as a listener, you do as well. So I just wanted to bring just my thoughts on this, and again, you may or may not agree. So yeah, and like I just wanted to share my thoughts around this, and also like situations in my own life where I could see the harm that could have been done to me if I actually listened. Yeah. And so like I think it's pretty fair to say that not everything in this world is black or white. It's not this or that. It is not absolute. And I actually don't believe in absolutes. And the more I've gotten, I guess, older and just kind of taking a step back and looking at a bigger picture, I'm just like, oh, you know what? Like, it's so easy for our brains to want to, like, okay, it's either this or that. And from what I've learned, it is kind of a trauma response. And I feel like there's also, like, I think in general, there is this, like, it feels better to be around people who are positive, right? It feels better to look on the bright side of things. In general, nobody wants to be around someone who's a Debbie Downer, negative Nelly, like an Eeyore. And also, we're all human. So we get to express and feel all of our emotions. And we don't have to, there's no good or bad in our emotions. Our emotions are just what it is. But I feel like a lot of times emotions get labeled good or bad. Like even in the spiritual world, there's like this graph of emotions where peace, bliss, happiness, joy is on the high vibe, like the frequency is very high. And on the low level list, a lower vibrational list is like, on the list is like sadness, grief, anger, whatever, right? And so it's like, well, we don't want to be in that state of sadness and grief. We want to be high vibing, right? Like all of that. And I think there is harm there. Like obviously, we don't want to sit in sadness forever, But I actually don't necessarily think being in a state of like ultimate joy and like I don't know, like I just don't think that it is realistic to assume that we're always going to be, always happy, blissed out, right? Like I feel like in order to experience this of joy, we need the contrast of like contrast is required, right? Otherwise, it's like we're flatlining in a way, right? Like, and so I just there's thoughts there because I know that in the New Age spiritual world, there is this tendency to want to be at that level, like good vibes only, whatnot, and I fall into that, right? So, and then for myself, like I don't drink that Kool-Aid anymore, so to speak, because I feel like that actually doesn't serve me and it doesn't serve other people around me when they do hit hardships, And I think what I'm inviting us all is to like have more real conversations and really like be like know how we're actually feeling instead of trying to like placate it or override our sense of what's actually happening within us. And so yeah, a few years back, for those of you who have listened to my podcasts, since this was created, since the podcast was created, you'll know that I experienced a pretty awful knee injury, and it was bad. Like looking back, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And I couldn't leave my house without help. So basically I was stuck indoors, and like, I didn't know what actually happened to my knee until like 3 weeks later, when I finally was able to get an MRI. When I finally got the results, like I was so like emotionally, I was grieving. I was like very sad. I was in tears. I was crying. I was also very angry at the situation, angry at myself for the action that I took that got myself to that injury, and also angry that there wasn't enough safety, and just like things could have been done better. And the result was I had a really terrible knee injury. And I shared a little bit on Facebook, on the socials. And FYI, if you hear sounds, I apologize. I have the window open and there are cars driving by. Anyway, and so I shared a little bit about my experience on Facebook, and there were people that were reaching out to like just to offer some suggestions. And I was reaching out to people who had a similar injury, and I was terrified of like possibly needing surgery. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, because the recovery and all of that, I just heard horror stories, and like literally it was like a nightmare happening, because like this was like the last thing I ever wanted to have happen to me. And people were coming into my DMs, and like I was generally open to it, but sometimes you just have to be careful. Like we have to be careful of what we're taking in, right? Because sometimes people are offering suggestions that actually isn't helpful. And I was talking to this one person, and ultimately he was trying to sell me his services. And I was like, well, let me do some research. But after we talked, he came back into my DMs, was like, hey, like I noticed that you're angry and like very negative. And I just have to say that from my experience, it doesn't serve to be like that, and it's better to be positive. I don't know how I responded to that, but like this was like getting the news of what happened to my knee. Like I was grieving, and I was in a whole bag of emotions. I'll tell you how I was not feeling. I was not happy, right? And so when I received his note, I'm trying to like, I don't know how I responded to him. And I had this moment of like, oh, like, am I doing something wrong? Like I questioned myself. And thank God, like looking back, thank God I had enough self-awareness that like it threw me off, right? His comment threw me off. And it probably set me up for a little bit of a loop of like, oh my gosh, like, so that was not helpful. Getting his messages like that was not helpful. And I was still feeling distraught, right? And it's like, I cannot go from like 0 to 60. Like I just can't flip a switch in my emotions. And so that's an example of what he was saying, was basically to bypass your actual feelings. And there's no good or bad. Like, I don't think it's actually helpful to label an emotion as a good thing or a bad thing, because emotions are they just are, right? We're human. We get to experience the full spectrum of emotions. And like if I had to like analyze what was happening, he was probably uncomfortable with being on the receiving end of it, right? And therefore, let's try to calm this person down, right? Like, because I'm not comfortable being in your space right now, right? And that happens a lot, and we try to like because we're not comfortable, we don't know how to hold space, we'll try to say something to make someone else feel better. And really it's to make ourselves feel better. You know what I mean? And so like, I remember feeling like, oh God, like that, receiving that didn't feel good. And I'm also proud of myself for rejecting his advice, right? Because it's like, well, first of all, there's no way I can even, I don't have, like, I can't fake that. I can't fake happiness. I can't fake positivity at this moment. So I gave myself the permission and the space to go down that dark hole, to go down and face the shadow that so many of us avoid because it's not quote unquote positive, high vibe, like happy. I'm so glad I did that. Like the tears, the anger, like I just remember like the hot tears coming out of my eyes and I was like crying on my couch. I was just letting it all out. And I wasn't distracting myself. I was literally in tears. And like I just went through that dark shadow, that valley, that shadow of the death. Slight exaggeration, but I did. Like I gave myself permission and all the emotions that came with it, the grief, the anger, the like all of it. And I'm so glad I did because like it wasn't like I was in that space for like months and weeks, weeks and months. Like I was probably there for a few days. And it wasn't like all day, every day. It was probably like a few hours and it would hit, the emotion would hit, and I would just like, oh, okay. Like, and I gave myself the space. And I wasn't trying to be positive when I talked to people. I was like, this is really sucky. I hate that this is happening. And the people who had gone through what I experienced, like they were very empathetic because they've gone through it. Like they understood. And it's a long healing process. And like, I'm so proud of myself because fast forward to, 4 years later, like I don't have any trauma. I don't have any emotional trauma around my knee. I gave myself the emotional space to go down that dark hole and I came out of it. It's faster to face it than it is to try to push it away, which is a lot of what we are taught to do, because we're told to be positive and look on the bright side and da 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 da. And like being aware of my emotions and allowing myself to go through all of it, I feel like it was very helpful for my recovery because I then did have the space to do more meditations that were focusing on like, let's, visualize healthy healing for the knee, which I feel like is never a bad thing to like, let's imagine good things happening to my knee and that it is healing. And like, I also gave myself the space to feel all of that, the yucky feelings, so to speak. Like the ones that might feel unpleasant, but it's not bad. Those emotions aren't bad. And I wouldn't even say it's negative. They're just emotions. It's like, do we have to label it? And so like, that's just an example there of like, if I did listen to that advice, that would have been totally just blowing past my own emotions and neglecting what I actually needed. And I was kind of like, oh, like it threw me off for a loop when I received that. And like, I'm so glad that I totally ignored it, right? I don't know how I responded to him, but I'm just like celebrating my own authority of like trusting my own self and not taking advice just because some expert was offering advice to me. So that's one example of like, it could have been potentially harmful for me if I actually listened. And then there's like other things that get tossed and said a lot in our society. And I already mentioned one of them, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one because I wanted to kind of poke holes at it. And that one, like the next phrase that I already hinted at, highlighted, is the phrase "everything happens for a reason," or like there's a lot of absolute statements like that are of similar themes, and this one I feel like this one I get activated by. Well, I feel like I've dissected this one enough in my own self that it no longer activates me as much. But I have said this to myself before, and I might have said this to other people before. And I will speak for myself that when I have said it before, it did come from a place of like, I know better than you, like this is a spiritual thing. It's kind of we need to stop with that type of thinking, because first it is from a place of privilege, and then also being on the receiving end of that, it does not feel good. So it's like, okay, lesson learned. And also, like, that is an absolute, that is false. And it's like, not everything happens for a reason. Some things might happen for a reason, but not everything. And I feel like, there's people that I've spoken to who absolutely live by this statement. And because it brings them some level of peace, kind of justification of why, when shit hits the fan, it gives them a sense of peace, knowing that maybe, God, the universe is looking out for them in some way. And so, like, I can understand that if this type of thinking helps someone, then great, right? But there's another side of like, that's a personal belief. It's not a fact, right? It's not an absolute truth. It's not like it's not fact. It is a belief. So to impose that on someone else, particularly when they're experiencing a hardship, it actually is not helpful, and it is harmful, because what it is like you're telling the other person that what they're actually feeling is not really important, because something better is going to be happening. And so not to dwell on it, when really it's like, no, that person who's experiencing the hardship, they need to experience what they're feeling. Why try to bypass it, right? So like spiritual bypassing, from my perspective of what it means to spiritually bypass, is to skip what is actually happening in terms of like what someone is really feeling, to skip what they're really feeling, and to go for the positive. Right? Like, I'm really angry right now, I'm going to focus on gratitude, right? But it's like, why are we not feeling our anger? Like, why? Right? Like, why, if we're feeling jealous, why not like sit with that and maybe like investigate, okay, like what's happening? Like what's underlying this feeling of jealousy that doesn't feel good? This is the shadow side of things. This is the stuff that we try to stuff under the rug. And if we don't look at it, it's going to always be there, right? And there's juice in that shadow, in the I don't know, like there's juice there, right? And it doesn't feel good, so to speak, but there's so much fodder there, And so, yeah, spiritual bypass, how I see it, is like we try to like placate our actual emotions for the sake of feeling more positive, and then we override the truth of what is actually happening. And that is kind of this wishful thinking / privilege thinking, because, and I used to believe this because like, oh my gosh, like I really drank the Kool-Aid of the spiritual New Age world. It's kind of like, oh yeah, everything happens for a reason. Like our soul is here to learn a lesson. But what do we say about people who are in intense poverty, right? They've like intense poverty, like crazy stuff has happened to them, abuse, there's just so much shit that can happen to people. We cannot say to them in their face, oh, everything happens for a reason. Your soul is here to learn a lesson. There's a growth for you. That is the most like condescending, patronizing, really from a privileged place. And I'll bet, I'll bet money that the person saying it has not experienced it before. And even if they did, it's not the same, right? We all have different levels of trauma, ancestrally, different cultural differences, different history. Just because something worked out for you, it doesn't mean it's going to work out the same with someone else, right? And so it is very harmful to say words like that to other people. And it's like, in the past, I know I've thought of that to make myself feel better in seeing the hardships, because I cannot explain it away. I don't know why. So it kind of makes me feel a little bit better, probably more superior. Like, this person probably has really bad karma and that's why it's happening to them. Like, that is like a really mean, cruel assumption and judgment. And it's very judgmental. And so it doesn't feel good on the receiving end. And to say it to someone who's actually experiencing the hardship is even worse, right? So it's kind of like, we got to read the room and also like question these types of beliefs, because our world is changing, and this is like an opportunity to really look at like, oh, like maybe that actually isn't serving. It actually doesn't serve me to think like that necessarily. Sometimes it might, like, oh gosh, when I look back and connect the dots, like, wow, but in the moment, it's like, can we just be with the feeling of what is happening instead of trying to label something as good or bad? A lot of times when we say these type of statements, everything happens for a reason or whatever, it's all for the good of whatever. There's lots of different variations of that. There's an assumption that it is like the reason is for a good reason, right? But we don't know that. We don't know that the outcome is for a good reason. Sometimes bad, like crappy things can happen after that. Like job losses, like not everybody bounces back or recovers from a job loss, right? Whether a person got laid off or whatever. And I know plenty of people who, like, they were laid off at an age where they could, like, they were too old to find a new job per se, like, or like, the industry is just like, it was hard to find a new job, and afterwards it's just like financially not well, right? There's lots of examples that I know of. And then I also know like people bounce back and they were able to find better jobs or whatever. Like, so like, it's not for us to judge and give somebody like, oh, like you didn't think positively enough, or like you got to think more positive. Like, it's just not helpful. And saying someone like, oh, this is happening to you for something better is coming, I think it's from a very myopic perspective, to be honest. It's like a very like narrow-minded, imposing one's belief that can be very hurtful. There's this person that I found on Facebook, and he's written a few books. And I actually really like, when I read his one of his, he has, if you follow him on Facebook, his name is Jeff Brown. He is a former criminal lawyer, and he is a former psychotherapist. And when I read some of his stuff, I'm like, oh my God, this guy gets it. And what I really appreciate about this author, Jeff Brown, is like, he's all around like, hey, let's take it back to being human. Like, yes, like, as I consider myself spiritual, although I have my own connection to the divine and I don't impose this on other people. And I also I think there is a little bit of brainwashing when it comes to some of the new age stuff. I'll be honest. Like, it's kind of like, when I look at the organizations that teach this stuff, I'm like, there's harm being done. And yeah, I'm not going to get too much into that, just speaking from my own observations. And there's a way like that it keeps people in their boxes from causing or from rocking the boat, right? If we don't talk about what's negative, we don't question things, then we can continue moving forward with whatever we're trying to sell, right? Anyways, okay, so back to Jeff Brown. So he wrote this beautiful, well, in his book, It's called, his new book is Humanifestations on Trauma, Truth, and Transformation. And I've not actually read this book, but he's shared a few quotes from his book. And when I read this, I'm like, oh my God, like he gets it. So I'll read this little snippet. If we don't look at the relationship between our childhood trauma and our ways of being, we will never grow into adulthood. We imagine ourselves liberated from trauma, but our trauma is running the show. Every single person I have known who was fixated on oneness, awakening, transcendence, and enlightenment was fleeing an unresolved childhood. These flights of fancy were essential coping strategies, but eventually came crashing down to earth. Because there can be no awakening without healing, no oneness without integration, no transcendence without embodiment. And when you actually do that work, the most amazing thing happens. You stop looking for it out there or up there. You find it right here in the bones of your being. Breathing in, breathing out, here we are. So like what I get from that quote or that paragraph is basically what I experienced when I went through my knee injury. Like I gave myself the space to really like just feel and cry and just like be with my emotions. A lot of times, people have described trauma as like unprocessed emotions that it's like that's one form of trauma where like the emotional loop wasn't complete. So things keep getting like activated within us because it's like this is an opportunity to complete it. And like until it's healed, like these things a lot of times it's like, oh my God, like I'm feeling this again. Like, I have problems setting boundaries and this thing keeps happening. And it's like there's probably like a trauma loop that needs to be closed, right? To heal it. And so to just jump into something positive, like I'm going to bypass all of this to skip into enlightenment is like, it's very damaging, right? And so like going back to that knee injury that I had, like I don't have any emotional trauma around my knee and I'm 100% healed, right? And like I'm really proud of the decisions I made post injury that got me to where I am today. Because if I ever try to ignore my feelings and focus just on the positive because it's whatever is going to impact my healing, or it's like it's not spiritual to feel angry or whatever, I'm literally like not giving myself an opportunity to fully heal. So I feel like I'm tying this back to spirituality because I was having a conversation with someone and we were basically not on the same page, and we were just not on the same page. But he's a cool person, and he was like, "Wait, do you and I have the same perspective where, our goal, mission, right? The goal is to achieve enlightenment, where we're escaping this disillusionment of reality and like Maya, like this, kind of like this." Matrix, right? For oneness and basically to transcend our reality right now because there's a lot of shit happening in the world. And I think like maybe, I don't know, like maybe at one point there's like this naive part of me that thought that, no offense. But my response to him was, no, I actually don't. Like I said, like we have a very precious time here on earth, and I'm in this body one time, and I want to experience it fully in the flesh, in the body, in my bones, and I don't want to escape it. And that doesn't mean I'm going to be like all materialistic, superficial, like, but what it does mean is like I'm here for all of it, and I want to experience all of it. Like I'm not going to like bypass my emotions and my feelings just for the sake of transcendence that feels really outside of me, where really my consciousness, I'm in a body, right? This is what it is to be here on earth at this moment in time. So I'm going to be present as much as I can while I still have time here. And that's part of it. It's like, can we be present, right? Rather than trying to escape, right? Can we be present? Can we be with our breath? Can we sit with what is happening, acknowledge it? And yeah, it's like, if I need to seek help, maybe see a somatic therapist that can help me be in more touch with what's happening with my body. I know there's like people have experienced trauma and there's dissociation with their body because it doesn't feel safe to be in their body. But like, that's something else, right? That's where it really serves people to seek professional support so that they could heal that, right? And so I don't think it's that cut and dry, right? So that it's like spiritual bypassing can be really dangerous. There's, like I shared around, job losses and whatnot. And I've heard things that have been said around like job loss. And I'm just like, none of these are really helpful, And one is like, oh, something better. Like maybe like the universe is like, and it comes from a place of condescension again, right? It's like, oh, like something better is going to happen, right? Like you just never know. Like, God might be putting you on the right path now that you don't have your job, like a layoff or whatever, getting fired, like whatever, right? And with what I know, right, a person who suddenly has an unexpected job loss, first of all, it's not planned, right? And so the financial rug got pulled from underneath them. They have either rent or mortgage to pay most of the time. They have bills to pay. And so to make that assumption on like when someone's going through like a financial hardship is like, and saying, oh, everything happens for a reason, or like, oh, like maybe this is, God's way of putting you on the right track or whatever. I mean, that's really not helpful. And it's actually pretty harmful because what's happening is like in that moment when that person is experiencing hardship, it's like what you're feeling right now isn't actually important. And the person saying is like, well, I know something better is going to be happening, right? Because they are more quote unquote spiritually enlightened or whatever. And it's like, that is like just that level of bypassing is like dismissing the person right there. And it's like, there's no, like that person who's saying all the harmful things is like, well, it's not your right because you don't know. We really don't know what's going to happen. Like we cannot really predict the future, right? And like there's just a lot, like I hear like really crazy shit sometimes. And it's like this level of like this inability to be real with someone. Like I really love Brene Brown's work. She talks about vulnerability and shame. And it's like in times of strife, when we're sitting with someone, the best response is to acknowledge their struggle and be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry you're experiencing this right now, right? Rather than trying to be positive or try to say something to make someone else feel better when it's actually not. I remember I was having a conversation with a friend and I was giving her the saga to like a breakup that I experienced. And I mean, it was like, there was a lot that was happening. And after I told her the whole story, like she just looked at me and was like, oh my God, that just sounds awful. And in that moment, like I felt so seen, so witnessed. And her recognizing that and seeing that in what I was experiencing, it just helped me drop this whole like story burden that I was carrying. And it helped me move on. And like that's what we need. We need more like just real, intentional like acknowledgement rather than trying to make someone feel better. Because that's not really our job, right? And so like trying to jump into the positive, that's spiritual bypassing in my book, is not necessarily, well, it's just not a good thing. I feel that to be really damaging. And can we sit with what is, right? Can we sit with like what is real without having to label something as good or bad and be in the present moment? I feel like that is kind of that's the real work, right? Of being able to do that. And something that Brene Brown has said, and I don't know the exact quote, but she basically said, like, find me someone who is able to sit with someone else going through a hardship and just be and have the ability to empathize. Like, that person has done a lot of work, right, on themselves. And I feel like that is like an invitation for all of us, to like look at the bigger picture, do healing work. I know for myself, like, yeah, I mean, we're not always having to do healing work, right? But like, there's definitely opportunities, especially, now where there's just so much change happening, where I think we can all be better served at just being more intentional and not necessarily like buying into certain thoughts or beliefs because it quote unquote feels good when it can actually be harmful, because a lot of these are just very superficial layers of ways of thinking, that doesn't look more deeply at trauma. And like, trauma is a huge, it's a huge topic right now. And like, before, I guess, the pandemic, it wasn't as big, but now it is, because the pandemic showed like a lot of like trauma that a lot of us have had, and it's all brought to the surface. So, yeah. Resources, well, one is to be with your emotions, and it's easier said than done. I understand that, because sometimes the emotions that we experience are like really hard, and we haven't had the role model of how to be with our emotions, right? A lot of the times growing up, when we were crying or as a child, like, we're a ball of emotions. A lot of times our parents or caregivers like told us to shut up or stop crying or blah, blah, blah. And so it gets like, we block the emotion, right? And so I think it does serve to have, professional support, whether it be, I really love somatic therapists, because it allows for the opportunity to be in touch with our sensations in our body, to have someone hold witness and help us process. And it's not comfortable. This work isn't comfortable, but I will say it's definitely very healing, rewarding, and cathartic. And there's a willingness to face, those quote unquote demons. And another way is potentially breath work. I know that for myself, whenever I do breath work, it's an opportunity to not overanalyze in my mind, right? And it's like, there's no judgment there. I do live in my head a lot. And something that my therapist has said to me is like, hey, like, no good or bad, like, thank your brain, thank your mind for trying to protect you, right? So there's wisdom there, and there's no judgment. And also there's also an opportunity to give our bodies a chance to share our body's wisdom with us, right? And so breathwork is another opportunity to bring the breath into the body, so it can create more space for us to feel, for us to potentially clear some of the, clear the blocks, the emotional blocks, through our breath. And so there's, a lot of different modalities that I feel like are available in, like, it's out there. And, it's up to us. It's up to us to, when we know better, we do better. And even that, it's like, where did that come from? Like, when we know better, we do better. And that's something that I can subscribe to, right? And I'm not saying like we achieve perfection, because no, I am definitely not perfect, right? We all will make mistakes. And it's just like, oh, like, okay, can I have hard conversations with people, right? Can I look at myself and be like, okay, like, let's see what I could do to repair this, So it asks for a level of maturity, rather than bypassing, washing over, what might not feel good in the moment. And I actually don't buy into a lot of the New Age spiritual dogma that is out there, even though, social media is if we live in social media too long and follow, because social media will bring us what we look at, right? We can get like conditioned by looking at social media because it just feeds us what we are looking at, right? The algorithms are set up like that. And a lot of times it's easy to be like, oh, it's easy to start adopting a lot of these quips and memes when there's so many more nuances and layers to certain sayings or ways of thinking or belief systems when, that's someone else's agenda. And I think it actually does serve to question things and to be curious. So with that said, I have interviewed a returning guest, a dear friend of mine, and an amazing therapist who focuses on trauma, Megan Clinton. Her interview will drop very soon. And so look out for that because we dive a little bit deeper in conversations around the coaching world, trauma, and the other topics that are similar to what I shared in here, but I wanted to hear it from a therapist's perspective. And then for those who are interested in breathwork, I am officially opened for business for breathwork. And the best way to learn more is to be on my mailing list, my email community. I'll put a link in the show notes. I have a few at this moment of recording in August. I have a few intro opportunities for breathwork, experiencing it with me. So pop on the mailing list, or if you're curious and if you want to know now, you can just send me a DM over Instagram at michellewong.xo. And you can just let me know that you are wanting to learn more about breathwork. In September-ish, I plan to host more group opportunities, virtual group breathwork. Right now, I have one-on-one opportunities at intro rates, and it's a great way. Like one-on-one's a great way to have sessions tailored to you and to experience it. And the 100% of the attention is on you. And so that is an invitation. If you're interested, feel free to reach out. Thank you for tuning in. I encourage you, if this episode gave you food for thought, something to chew on, this is a great conversation to have with friends. And I think it's good to have dialogue and to be curious. I have a little sticky note in my bathroom window, be curious, not judgmental. I think I just have it be curious, but that's a line from Ted Lasso. So anyways, thank you for tuning in, and until next time, take care. To help you feel more supported and nourished in your body and nervous system, you're invited to download the free I Am Supported meditation in the show notes. May you feel grounded in who you are as you become the fullest expression of yourself. Thank you for listening to the Sacred Emergence podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and thank you in advance for sharing with those who can benefit. Until next time.